Okay, I don't know what happened with that other one. I'm going to repost a link here because I honestly am not sure what happened. Hold on just a second. Let's see. Okay. Ugh. All right. Okay. I don't know what happened. I'm still trying to figure out. But it looks like it's working now, which is good. Let me see if I can real quick delete these other two before it gets real confusing for people. Let's see here. Okay, so we're doing holes. We're doing chapter 20, which means that we've gotten, pretty far along. Okay. I'll figure out how to do that later. All right. So the sound is fine. There's Tess. Hi, Tess. I still look all sepia toned, like I'm talking to you from the distant past, but whatever. Okay, so this is Louis Sacker's Holes. We're on chapter 20, which is on page 88. Okay, it felt good to walk in the shade of two oak trees. Stanley wondered if this was how a condemned man felt on his way to the electric chair, appreciating all of the good things in life for the first time. They had to step around holes to get to the cabin door. Stanley was surprised to see so many around the cabin. He would have expected the warden to not want the campers digging so close to her home. But several holes were right up against the cabin wall. The holes were closer together here as well and were of different shapes and sizes. I had forgotten what happened last time. So Stanley took the blame for taking all of those sunflower seeds. That's right. Okay. And now he's in trouble. Mr. Sir knocked on the door. Stanley still held the empty sack. Yes, the warden said, opening the door. There's a little trouble out on the lake, Mr. Sir said. Caveman will tell you all about it. The warden stared at Mr. Sir a moment, then her gaze turned to Stanley. He felt nothing but dread now. Come in, I suppose, said the warden. You're letting the cold air out. It was air-conditioned inside her cabin. The television was going. She picked up the remote and turned it off. She sat down on a canvas chair. She was barefoot and wearing shorts. Her legs were as freckled as her face and arms. So what is it you have to tell me? Stanley took a breath to steady himself. While Mr. Sir was filling the canteens, I snuck into the truck and stole his sack of sunflower seeds. I see. She turned to Mr. Sir. That's why you brought him here? Yes, but I think he's lying. I think someone else stole the sack and Caveman is covering up for X-ray or somebody. It was a 20-pound sack and he claims to have eaten them all by himself. He took the sack from Stanley and handed it to the warden. I see, the warden said again. The sack wasn't full, said Stanley, and I spilled a lot. You can check my hole. In that room, Caveman, there's a small flowered case. Will you get it for me, please? She pointed to a door. Stanley looked at the door, looked at the warden, then back at the door. He slowly walked toward it. It was kind of a dressing room with a sink and a mirror. Next to the sink, he saw the case, white with pink roses. He brought it out to the warden, and she set it on the glass coffee table in front of her. She unclasped the latch and opened the case. It was a makeup case. Stanley's mother had one similar to it. He saw several bottles of nail polish remover, a couple of lipstick tubes, and other jars and powders. The warden held up a small jar of dark red nail polish. You see this, caveman? He nodded. This is my special nail polish. Do you see the dark, rich color? You can't buy that in a store. I have to make it myself. Stanley had no idea why she was showing it to him. He wondered why the warden would ever have the need to wear nail polish or makeup. Do you want to know my secret ingredient? He raised and lowered one shoulder. The warden opened the bottle. Rattlesnake venom. With a small paintbrush, she began applying it to the nails on her left hand. It's perfectly harmless when it's dry. She finished her left hand. She waved it in the air for a few seconds and then began painting the fingers on her right hand. It's only toxic while it's wet. She finished painting her nails, then stood up. She reached over and touched Stanley's face with her fingers. She ran her sharp, wet nails very gently down his cheek. He felt his skin tingle. The nail on her pinky just barely touched the wound behind his ear. A sharp sting of pain caused him to jump back. The warden turned to face Mr. Sir, who was sitting on the fireplace hearth. So you think he stole your sunflower seeds? No, he says he stole them, but I think it was... She stepped toward him and struck him across the face. Mr. Sir stared at her. He had 3 long red marks slanting across the left side of his face. Stanley didn't know if the redness was caused by her nail polish or his blood. It took a moment for the venom to sink in. Suddenly, Mr. Sir screamed and clutched his face with both hands. He let himself fall over, rolling off the hearth and onto the rug. The warden spoke softly. I don't care about your sunflower seeds. Mr. Sir moaned. If you must know, said the warden, I liked it better when you smoked. For a second, Mr. Sir's pain began to recede. He took several long, deep breaths. Then his head jerked violently, and he let out a shrill scream, worse than the one before. The warden turned to Stanley. I suggest you go back to your hole now. Stanley started to go, but Mr. Sir lay in the way. Stanley could see the muscles on his face jump and twitch. His body writhed in agony. Stanley stepped carefully over him. Is he... Excuse me? Said the warden. Stanley was too frightened to speak. He's not going to die, the warden said, unfortunately for you. Chapter 21. So, the warden is scary with her rattlesnake venom polish. I kind of want some for myself. But that comment, unfortunately for you. So Stanley got out of getting in trouble with the warden, but now he's really made an enemy out of Mr. Sir, right? It was a long walk back to the hole. Stanley looked out through the haze of heat and dirt at the other boys lowering and raising their shovels. Group D was the farthest away. He realized that once again he'd be digging long after everyone else had quit. He hoped he'd finish before Mr. Sir recovered. He didn't want to be alone out there with Mr. Sir. He won't die, the warden had said, unfortunately for you. Walking across the desolate wasteland, Stanley thought about his great-grandfather, not the pig stealer, but the pig stealer's son, the one who was robbed by Kissing Kate Barlow. He tried to imagine how he must have felt after Kissing Kate had left him stranded in the desert. It probably wasn't a whole lot different from the way he himself felt now. Kate Barlow had left his great-grandfather to face the hot, barren desert. The warden had left Stanley to face Mr. Sir. Somehow, his great-grandfather had survived for 17 days before he was rescued by a couple of rattlesnake hunters. He was insane when they found him. When he was asked how he had lived so long, he had said he found refuge in God's thumb. He spent nearly a month in the hospital. He ended up marrying one of the nurses. Nobody ever knew what he meant by God's thumb, including himself. Stanley heard a twitching sound. He stopped in mid-step with one foot still in the air. A rattlesnake lay coiled beneath his foot. Its tail was pointed upward, rattling. Stanley backed his leg away, then turned and ran. The rattlesnake didn't chase after him. It had rattled its tail to warn him to stay away. Whew, thanks for the warning, Stanley whispered as his heart pounded. That rattlesnake would be a lot more dangerous if it didn't have a rattle. I don't know if you guys have ever come across a rattlesnake, but stay away from rattlesnakes. And if they rattle, then you just get out of their way. Hey, caveman, called Armpit. You're still alive. What'd the warden say? Asked X-Ray. Would you tell her? Asked Magnet. I told her I stole the seed, said Stanley. Good going, said Magnet. What'd she do? Said Zigzag. Stanley shrugged one shoulder. Nothing. She got mad at Mr. Sir for bothering her. He didn't feel like going into the details. If he didn't talk about it, maybe it didn't happen. He went over to his hole, and to his surprise, it was nearly finished. He stared at it, amazed. It didn't make sense. Or perhaps it did. He smiled. Since he had taken the blame for the sunflower seeds, he realized the other boys had dug his hole for him. Hey, thanks, he said. Don't look at me, said X-Ray. Confused, Stanley looked around. From Magnet to Armpit to Zigzag to Squid, none of them took credit for it. Then he turned to Zero, who had been quietly digging in his hole since Stanley's return. Zero's hole was smaller than all the others. So that's interesting. So Zero just did this favor for him, because Stanley took the blame for all of them. But Stanley didn't go out of his way to help Zero, did he? Remember when Zero asked him if he could, if he could teach Zero how to read? So hopefully Stanley feels a little guilty. And Christian, I agree with you. I love the warden. And not just because I want rattlesnake venom. What's it called? Nail polish. Okay. Chapter 22. I think it was perfect size. Stanley was the first one finished. He spat in his hole, then showered and changed into his cleaner set of clothes. It had been 3 days since the laundry was done, so even his clean set was dirty and smelly. Tomorrow, these would be his work clothes, and his other set would be washed. He could think of no reason why Zero would dig his hole for him. Zero didn't even get any sunflower seeds. I guess he likes to dig holes, Armpit had said. He's a mole, Zigzag had said. I think he eats dirt. Moles don't eat dirt, X-Ray had pointed out. Worms eat dirt. Hey, Zero, Squid had asked. Are you a mole or a worm? Zero had said nothing. Stanley had never even thanked him, but now he sat on his cot and waited for Zero to return from the shower room. Thanks, he said as Zero entered through the tent flap. Zero glanced at him, then over to the crates where he deposited his dirty clothes and towel. Why'd you help me? Stanley asked. Zero turned around. You didn't steal the sunflower seeds. He said, so? Neither did you, said Stanley. Zero stared at him. His eyes seemed to expand, and it was almost as though Zero were looking right through him. You didn't steal the sneakers, he said. Stanley said nothing. He watched Zero walk out of the tent. If anybody had X-ray vision, it was Zero. Wait, he called, then hurried out after him. Zero had stopped just outside the tent, and Stanley almost ran into him. I'll try to teach you to read if you want, Stanley offered. I don't know if I know how to teach, but I'm not that worn out today since you dug a lot my hole. A big smile spread across Zero's face. They returned to the tent where they were less likely to be bothered. Stanley got his box of stationery and a pen out of his crate. They sat down on the ground. Do you know the alphabet? Stanley asked. For a second, he thought he saw a flash of defiance in Zero's eyes. Then it passed. I think I know some of it, Zero said. A, B, C, D. Keep going, said Stanley. Zero's eyes looked upward. E, F, said Stanley. G, said Zero. He blew some air out of the side of his mouth. H, I, K, P. H, I, J, K, L, Stanley said. That's right, said Zero. I've heard it before. I just don't have it memorized exactly. That's all right, said Stanley. Here, say the whole thing. I'll say the whole thing just to refresh your memory, and then you can try it. He recited the alphabet for Zero, and then Zero repeated it without a single mistake. Not bad for a kid who had never seen Sesame Street. Well, I've heard it before somewhere, Zero said, trying to act like it was nothing, but his big smile gave him away. The next step was harder. Stanley had to figure out how to teach him to recognize each letter. He gave Zero a piece of paper and then took a piece for himself. I guess we'll start with A. He printed a capital A and then Zero copied it on his sheet of paper. The paper wasn't lined, which made it more difficult, but Zero's A wasn't bad, just a little big. Stanley told him he needed to write smaller, or else they'd run out of paper real quick. Zero printed it smaller. Actually, there are 2 ways to write each letter, Stanley said, as he realized this was going to be even harder than he thought. That's a capital A, but usually you'll see a small a. You only have capitals at the beginning of a word, and only if it's at the start of a sentence or if it's a proper noun like a name. Zero nodded as if he understood, but Stanley knew he had made very little sense. He printed a lowercase a, and Zero copied it. So they're 52, said Zero. Stanley didn't know what he was talking about. Instead of 26 letters, there are really 52. Stanley looked at him, surprised. I guess that's right. How'd you figure that out? He asked. Zero said nothing. Did you add? Zero said nothing. Did you multiply? That's just how many there are, said Zero. Stanley raised and lowered one shoulder. He didn't even know how Zero knew that there were 26 in the first place. Did he count them as he recited them? He had Zero write a few more upper and lowercase a's, and then he moved on to a capital B. This was going to take a long time, he realized. You can teach me 10 letters a day, suggested Zero. 5 capitals and 5 smalls. After 5 days, I'll know them all, except on the last day, I'll have to do 12. 6 capitals and 6 smalls. Again, Stanley stared at him, amazed that he was able to figure all of that out. Zero must have thought he was staring for a different reason because he said, I'll dig part of your hole every day. I can dig for about an hour, and then you can teach me for an hour. And since I'm a faster digger anyway, our holes will get done about the same time. I won't have to wait for you. Okay, Stanley agreed. As Zero was printing his B's, Stanley asked him how he figured out it would take 5 days. Did you multiply? Did you divide? That's just what it is, Zero said. It's good math, said Stanley. I'm not stupid, Zero said. I know everybody thinks I am. I just don't like answering their questions. Later that night, as he lay on his cot, Stanley reconsidered the deal he had made with Zero. Getting a break every day would be a relief, but he knew that X-Ray wouldn't like it. He wondered if there might be some way Zero would agree to dig part of X-Ray's hole again. But then again, why should he? I'm the one teaching Zero. I need the break, so I'll have energy to teach him. I'm the one who took the blame for the sunflower seeds. I'm the one Mr. Sir is mad at. He closed his eyes, and images from the warden's cabin floated inside his head. Her red fingernails, Mr. Sir writhing on the floor, and her flowered makeup kit. He opened his eyes. He suddenly realized where he'd seen the gold tube before. He'd seen it in his mother's bathroom, and he'd seen it again in the ward's cabin. It was half of a lipstick container. KB? KB! And remember, this is like the KB that he had seen in the gold tube. He felt a jolt of astonishment. His mouth silently formed the name Kate Barlow as he wondered if it really could have belonged to the kissin' outlaw. Dun dun dun. So I wanna share two things with you guys before we go. One is the tomato plant finally made a tomato. So I'm gonna grab it real quick so you can see it because it looks like a cartoon emoji. Hold on. Look at it. It made a tomato, and the tomato looks like a tomato. So that is very exciting, except as you guys know, I hate tomatoes. So I haven't decided what to do with it yet. I might make like a sauce. I don't know. I have to think about it. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, Christian Alexander is saying here in the comments, Tess, your mom showed you the picture, that Stanley, the lowercase, and he still says small. So I'll tell you guys something. I didn't know this was going to come up, otherwise I would have pictures to show you. So way, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago, they used to do printing press, right? I'm hesitating a lot because what I want to tell you is that a couple of years ago, I studied abroad in England at a university called Oxford. And Oxford is an old university. It's older than the Aztec Empire. And at Oxford, they have their old printing presses. And sometimes you can go and use them. So the way that a printing press works is if you want to print a page like this, then every single thing that you see on the page, every single letter, every single quotation mark, period, space, everything is a little metal letter on a wooden block. And they're teeny, 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 tiny. And you have to sit there with tweezers and then take every single little letter, period, whatever, take all the little blocks and then put them in rows backwards. And then you put them in rows, and then it makes a plate with all these rows of letters, and you put the plate on the machine, and then you put the paper, you ink up the plate, you run it through the machine, and then it presses it real hard. And when it goes out of the machine, it's like a big wheel, kind of squeezes it out. Then you pull it up, and then all of your text is like this, but it's not backward, it's the right side up. And Christian Alexander, let me tell you, it was exciting. That's why I want to share it with you. So that's how you get print. So I went and I wanted to print my own page, and I wanted to do a poem. So I'm doing the letters. And then I asked the guy there, I was like, hey, where are the lowercase letters? And he was like, oh, just use the lowercase. And I was like, yeah, I want the lowercase letters, but I don't know where the small ones are. Like, where's the lowercase? And he was like, use the lowercase. And I was so frustrated with him. And then all of a sudden I had like a light bulb moment. And I realized like, oh my gosh. And he saw my face and he laughed. He says, yeah, this is actually where we get the words from. So if you are working with a printing press and you're doing the thing with like the tweezers and the plates and the machine, whatever, it's too tedious to sit. So you stand. And the letters are on two big trays like this. And they're tall so that you can stand and pull them like this and pull them like this. Because imagine how many times you would have to do it to like print an entire book, like if you're a professional printer. And the way that they have them sorted is that if it's a letter that gets used a lot, like an E gets like a big box. And if it's a letter that only gets used very little, like an X, then it gets like a little box. And up here in the upper case, they have the capital letters. And down here in the lower case, they have the small letters, the little letters. So anyway, that's where we get uppercase and lowercase from, is that they used to be like a physical case of letters. There were the capitals that were up, and then the lower ones were the little ones. So anyway, that's like your printing press fun fact. All right, guys, have a really, really, really good weekend. And tomorrow or next week, we'll do a garden day one day, and then we'll read some more of Holes. If you run into anybody with red nail polish, you just be real careful. That's all I'm saying. Bye, guys. Have a good weekend.